You're tuning in to Barski-Lyn Adventures. Welcome to our little corner of the bookish community. Well, that'll come up. Ow.
Are you okay? I'm so sorry. I was trying to do it one-handed because I did it that one time and it was really cool. And this does not work that way. Please tell me we're gonna cut that for
That's gotta be in it. Yeah, that'll be our first short for this episode.
Oh my gosh.
Join the chaos.
I like to sit funny and then this city thing. What's this called? It's called a cushion.
This city thing? I love it. Okay.
It's fine. Ready, set.
I'm gonna need to... I don't know how I'm gonna cut that. This will be interesting. Okay.
Which part?
Me throwing the clicker. Hello, beautiful people of the bookish persuasion. Thank you so much for joining us today as we talk about reading, writing, and publishing. I'm C.H. Lynn. With me, as always, is my...
clumsy co-host, Tracey
No,
Barski.
I was trying to think of some loving adjective for leaving.
Who throws things at her friends.
You got black stuff on my little wing.
I didn't.
I ain't mad about it. I ain't mad about it.
The thing.
I love it.
The thing.
And I love you. My incredibly loved co-host.
That's Tracey Barski. I already said my name.
Oh, okay. Just retake the entire intro. We are readers, writers, mothers, and wives, and we are here today discussing... Oh, we didn't... Do we want to discuss... Shoot.
What were we
Do we want to do the romance thing?
Oh, we were talking about the plotty thing, and then what was the other idea that you had suggested yesterday?
Oh, I was thinking we would just talk about the writing community.
Oh, yeah.
Whichever one we don't do today, we'll do next time, so...
Mm-hmm.
Let's do the romance stuff, because after... The next episode we do is going to be after the bash, which I feel like is a good time to talk about the writing community.
Sure.
Okay. So we're here today discussing... discussing plot, specifically romance.
Yeah, but not like this is how romance works in a book or anything like that.
No,
we're just kind of talking about plot in general and kind of what that looks like in different areas. So, plot. You have your straight romance novels. That's the only story there.
Very popular books.
Yes. And
often quite spicy.
Yes. And they're great.
Pride and Prejudice is a romance novel. Let's list off some very popular straight romance. Princess Bride. I think the action is a subplot for Princess Bride.
Oh, that's debatable. I feel like that's like along the lines of what I guess you're right. I mean, the whole thing is he's coming to rescue her, but it's action and adventure romance. Yeah. So that one's kind of iffy to me.
But Pride and Prejudice, you think is straight?
Straight up romance.
I mean, when I say straight romance, I mean romance is the main plot. There are obviously subplots of Pride and Prejudice. A whole,
because usually in a romance, it's not just we're watching somebody fall in love. Yeah, there's always a character arc element. There's always other things going on.
Conflicts.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a world that the characters live in. That's a huge part of plot that I think a lot of people are unaware of when it comes to building a story and telling a story. So you have your characters and you have what's going on with them. But the most three-dimensional, richest, thickest stories have an outside world and have there's a real
rich enough side characters and setting, which is not to say that you have to be an author who... I'm not a big setting describer. I do a little bit here and there, just enough to give you a sense without spending a lot of time on it. And Cheyenne sets the sets the set.
I set the set.
The scene a little bit more in depth, but still it's not like...
I go very in depth. I'm a very visual author.
But it's not, because there are books I've read where I'm like, okay, I get what the place looks like. You don't have to keep talking about it.
Fair.
And I don't get that feeling when I read your stuff.
Thanks.
So she does focus a lot more on giving you a sense of what things look like.
It took a lot of practice, I will say. It took a lot of practice.
I've had to work on that for myself.
You did a really good job with Unborn.
Thanks.
Unborn has more...
My thing is mostly you give enough detail because the reader's going to picture it how they're going to picture it. Because even I do that.
Well, I used to go too far into it. I've never been a person who lacks writing description, like scene setting description. I have always been one who overdoes it. So a specific example is in Hope and Lies when Maybelle sees Ben talking to like the general. Mm-hmm. I gave such a detailed explanation of what this dude's office looked like because I had a really vivid picture in my head of like, this is a general, this is running a war room, like this is, and completely unnecessary description. Yeah. It's enough to say,
especially when you're thinking about what would this character be paying attention to.
Yes.
And I think that's an important element to keep in mind though, about characters specifically too, because there might be ones who catalog every detail.
Yeah, if you're writing a spy novel, the character goes into a diner, they are going to notice the exits.
Yes.
They are going to notice how many people are in the room, and it's going to be cool. There are steak knives on this table. Like that's and that is the part of what I'm talking about when I say the world outside of the character existing. But what I actually meant was what you do in Unborn, which is knowing what the bad guys are doing. Is knowing outside of what you are writing, what is happening. And this is such a fun thing about us getting to write this, like, in this world together, not even the series together, but getting to write in this world together, is sitting there and talking about, like, cool, like, what's going on over here? Like, we're not going to see that anywhere in this book. We might have a couple things, but it's not present. Like, what is happening in the world at large, and how does that affect our characters? Mm-hmm. And I think that does add several layers of richness to the story versus just having the characters. It's like playing a video game where you can only see a few feet on either side of your character, right? Versus a video game where maybe it's not fully rendered, but you can still see the mountains in the distance. You can see the town.
Like you experience in your life.
Exactly.
Like there's a lot going on around you at all times. We're not always super aware of it, but we pick up things. We catch snippets of other people's conversations.
Exactly. Even if you don't pay attention to the news, you hear things about what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
And even if you don't pay attention to what's going on in your community, people talk about it.
So those are things that can add richness to your story.
For sure.
But back to the topic at hand.
Oh, right. We were discussing romance.
Romance plot. So my books tend to be romance heavy, but that's not the only thing going on. Sometimes it's a little more prevalent than other times. I have Love Undercover is much more about the romance and a little less about the other part of the story, but that part of the story is so intertwined with the whole thing that my romances tend to be either parallel with a big overarching plot, whereas, like my alternate chronicles, you made a good point that the romance was much more of a subplot for the first book.
Yeah. For reasons that we're not going to tell you because you should go read them.
Yeah, the mystery and the alternate reality thing was much more...
Which is honestly an amazing way to suck in readers who don't always go for romance.
Yeah.
So you can promise that there is romance in the series because there is. It's an epic love story. But you can also say, hey, this first one, not a lot of lovey-dove stuff. Yeah. It's mostly serial killer alternate dimensions.
Yeah. And then it kind of changes in the second book and then becomes a little bit more romance heavy in the third book.
But also
that influences elements of the third book.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the character arc for Cassidy, for starters. And it's a natural progression that feels very organic to the situation in which the characters find themselves. It doesn't feel like I wanted to have romance, so I'm going to make these two characters fall in love.
Yeah, it wasn't an afterthought. It was
intentional.
Yeah, the whole thing was intentional because I don't particularly like reading books that have no romance at all. Like, if I don't have any sense that there's going to be a romance, I probably won't pick the book up unless forced.
Like me forcing you to read Hope and Lies.
Not quite, but yes, kind of.
Me forcing you to read it, and then you're like, Cheyenne, it has some romance. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that was what helped a little bit. But yeah, I don't, if it's not mentioned at some point in the description, or I don't get a sense that that's part of the story.
Like in the blurb.
Yeah, if I don't get a sense that that's going to be in the story, I won't pick the book up.
That's fair.
I don't actually read just straight romance books most of the time.
Me neither.
My favorite is romantic suspense. So the romance is a really heavy element. And then I like a lot of action, and I like a lot of danger, and just that like level of stress and excitement that comes with it.
Action movies.
Yes. Like romance action movies. Because I feel like
I think there are very few action movies that, I mean, I guess more and more now. But it used to be that action movies.
I mean, the guy they always got the girl.
Fall for, I mean, Bond movies aren't romance, but arguably there's always a romance.
True. Well, and I was thinking like Die Hard, and I'm like, the first movie, he's there for his wife, obviously.
Yeah. And then they get divorced.
Yeah. One, then I was thinking of Live Free or Die Hard, because that one's my favorite one. But technically, kind of the daughter and the guy.
The nerdy guy.
But Bruce Willis.
Yeah, Bruce Willis is.
So that
character.
One's a little bit less, and I'm trying to think of some other action movies that I like. But all that to say,
I was thinking like the Expendables type movies. Those are not. Those don't have any like Extraction. Those don't have any kind of romance in them.
I think there was some in Expendables. One of them.
Oh, like one of the 12 guys had.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Yeah, it wasn't like the main focus. But it's not in the
trailer.
Right. So, anyways, all that to say, I personally don't like to read books without romance in there. I don't know why it's always appealed to me from a young age, but I also have a very sweet romantic husband, and I am very much in love with him. And I don't know if it's some element of like, I just like perpetuating that little like sweet, happy relationship kind of thing. I don't know. But I love romance. So you probably won't catch me writing anything but.
Not anything but you won't catch you writing anything that doesn't include it.
Correct. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
But all that to say, I don't often read just straight romance books. And I don't know if I'll write a straight romance. I started to, and I'm wanting to turn it into some kind of like mystery thing.
Is this the bar one?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh. So anyways, I like extra elements.
Yeah. But I also don't like reading straight romances, and I don't enjoy straight. I mean, I guess I like 50 First Dates, and I like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, and there are rom-coms that I like because of the comedy.
Yes.
The romance part of it is like, sure.
Well, there's a reason why I don't really like A Walk to Remember, The Notebook.
I've never seen The Notebook. I don't really have an interest in seeing it.
Yeah, some of those ones that are like, they're only
at me in the comments.
They're only about the romance, and I didn't like them as much.
Ooh, you know what one I really liked? Time Traveler's Wife. I watched that movie, and I read
most of the book, and it started to stress me out, and I knew how it ended, and so then I didn't finish it.
I don't remember how it ended. I think it ended sad, but I enjoyed the story as it went because of the aspect of time travel.
Yes. Well, and that's the thing is, that's what I prefer, is some kind of other element besides just the romance. And that's not to say that I won't read a straight romance.
Yeah.
But
Well, we have a lot of friends who write straight romances, and they write very fun and intriguing stories.
And they're great.
And we have a lot of friends who write some real smutty stuff, and they're fun, intriguing stories with spice.
Yep.
And there is zero judgment and zero...
Yeah,
there's
but the
nothing
approach
wrong with
is
it.
very different when you have... We were talking a little bit about Cheyenne's romance in her stories are much more sub-plot. It's not even like...
Yes.
Because
that's accurate.
You know, some of my books could potentially be, you know, the romance is a subplot, but most of the time it's going to be a little more parallel or just barely under whatever the main
I think in
plot.
Hope and Lies, the romance is a subplot, not a sub-sub. Because especially in Truth and Fury, there's 3 different romances going on. And I would pay a bit more attention. You would argue sub-sub?
Well, I'd argue Hope and Lies is a sub plot because you don't really get the sense that it's even happening until way closer to the end.
That's fair. Could be categorized as slow burn.
Very slow.
Very slow. It's a long book.
And then maybe even borderline, not really enemies to lovers, but...
I'm excited for you to read A Voice in the Tower.
Okay.
Because Song of the Deep is a romance, technically. And I think it gives that vibe.
Yeah. Well, and then...
Which you haven't read yet.
Like you said, Truth and Fury has several romances going, and that is...
which are also slow build and slow burn.
But they're obvious pretty much from the beginning. One had already been established.
Yes.
And then the other 2 were... They're pretty clear from... Well, the one is much more toward the end, but the other... It's a little more clear a lot earlier, I would feel like.
I don't even know which ones you're talking about because I have had people come at me and be like, I thought this person was going to end up with this person. And I was like, yeah, you were supposed to think it could have been either of those things.
Yeah.
I wrote it that way on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, that's where that story, all of that is sub. You have so much more going on, and I think people's concerns are much more about other things.
Oh no, are they going to end up together? That is not the concerns. Oh no, are they going to survive?
Right. Well, and am I going to survive? You know, this character's like, how do I make it?
Yeah.
Whereas in Cassidy, it's much more obvious, even from early on, that there's something brewing.
Well, but the way you do it makes so much sense in that, I mean, it's contemporary. Mm-hmm. And lives are at stake, but not all the time.
Right.
There is time for the slow down romance versus Hope and Lies and Truth and Fury, where it's like, cool, if we're not on it, if we're not paying attention, somebody's going to die, and we need to be focused.
And that is not, so it's not an element of, them.
Yeah. I will say that is one thing that I truly loved about the Hunger Games, is that in the first book especially, and I mean all of them, but in the first one and the second one, it was very much like, I don't have time to be in love with you. We're gonna die. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really accurate. And I thought that was really like, it doesn't matter if I have feelings for you. A, I don't. And B, we don't have time. Mm-hmm. Like, even if I was starting to feel a way.
That's the important element when you're writing stories like this, that you're like, okay, what is the most logical way to work this into the story?
How does it fit in the genre? Mm-hmm. How does it fit for the characters? Does it make sense world building and plot wise?
Because then I have Love Undercover. The whole point was the romance.
It's a romance. Yeah.
But it's got
action.
A lot of
it's an action
and
rom-com.
Suspense stuff involved with it. And so those things are happening simultaneously, and neither one is more than the other, really.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the romance and the action are on equal footing, and I think the suspense and the comedy are the subplots there.
Yeah. Whereas then we have Unborn, which has a very unique take on the romance element.
Yes.
That one was a slow burn for sure, for mine. Mm-hmm. I feel like yours
I don't know
was
what mine
too,
is called.
but sort of a second chance romance kind of element. But there was still a little bit of a slow burn to that. But it did, I feel like it did maybe happen earlier than mine. But it's more obvious that it's coming.
But because it's not, and because the characters already know each other. Mm-hmm. Because it's not...
And they have a history.
Yeah, it's not a... Because you make a really good... Not point. What am I trying to say? You do a very good job of not doing insta-love, which is something that, if you like it, great. But neither of us are fans of insta-love. So having your characters meet and then take the time, and then my characters already know each other and already have a history, which I think helps.
It's really hard to, in one book, to not do an insta-love. Because with my Cassidy books...
Depends on the genre.
Yes, but it was a 3-book deal.
Yes. And spans, I mean, there's a gap between book 2 and 3 there's a chunk of time that goes by where you're cool. They're spending time together in that chunk of time. And that's what I did for, Truth and Fury is only a couple weeks, but Hope and Lies, the main character's story takes like 6 months.
But it's hard. And even in Unborn, in mine, both of them, they take a while.
Yeah.
Mine is over the course of several weeks.
Which is why it's able to not be... I mean, there's a couple reasons for that. Part of it is that's how long things take in the real world. Stuff doesn't happen like in action movies, stuff happens immediately. And sometimes that's the case. And in your book, that happens where, we've got shit to do. It needs to happen now. But for the most part, it's a lot of sitting around and waiting and collecting intelligence and blah, blah, blah. And so you were able to incorporate that with the romance. It's interesting
because would you consider Rising to have a romantic subplot, or would you count that as...
I think that's subplot. I think Vic's story and what is happening to her, with her, and her priorities are the plot. Her priority is not the love interest until the last quarter of the book.
Yeah.
And even then, he's not her only priority. He is either matching plot priority or subplot priority. And I think because it's the last quarter, that makes the whole thing subplot.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But that is as background as a romance would be for anything that I'd probably ever write.
Yes.
That's as far down. Like it's such a...
Well, your next one is full on enemies to lovers.
Yes.
Which I'm really excited to read, because having you write scenes where two people are about to kill each other, and then we get to the end of the book and they're making out, I'm excited for that. That's one of my favorite. This will be
probably my first actual
true
enemies to lovers.
Yeah. This one, I mean, Rising is light animosity to lovers, which is what Hope and Lies was.
Yeah.
Was like, we don't like each other, to grudging respect to lovers.
Yes. To I understand you and I see value in who you are.
Yeah.
For sure.
I'm excited for you to read A Voice in the Tower, because that is... I
want to ask you this question.
Oh, yes.
When you come up with your story ideas and these kinds of, whether the romance is more at the forefront or not, do you think about it in terms of the romance, or is that something that sort of like feels natural? Like the other elements of the plot is what comes to your mind first?
That's such a good question. It depends on, and I'm going to say it again, the genre. It depends on the book. For my fairy tale retellings, the romance definitely is more part of the plot. Is the plot for, I mean, they're adventure stories, but the romance is the driving rescue the princess is the driving force in both books. And that's partially because I'm taking liberties from fairy tales. Existing stories.
That's
a huge
wonder
part
if that's part of the influence there, but in your other books.
So in Hope and Lies, I absolutely knew from 15 years old writing the story. I knew the romance. I knew the coupling that was going to happen, and I knew that they were going to be together. And I I don't want to give a bunch of spoilers, but in my own head, I knew like throughout the story what was going to happen with them. Not the ending that I recently told you, but I knew like how that was going to go and how I wanted it portrayed.
Yeah. I'd be curious if any other authors are listening to this, watching this, whatever right now. Drop a comment and tell me, when you come up with story ideas, is it with a romance in mind when you have romance written in your stories?
If you write subplot romance, is that a big piece of your either planning
because
or your...
every book idea I ever have is, here's the little inkling of the whatever the story is, always with the thought in my mind that who is the love interest and what is the romance going to be.
It's the reverse for me.
Whereas it's not like I'm like, okay, here's my romance idea. What backdrop can I put this in? It's like a simultaneous kind of thing, like, but I don't always even have...
Yeah, you have a big bowl and you're like, we're going to have a drop of story and a drop of romance. Let's see what comes out of it.
Yeah. So I'll usually... So like with my alternate realities, the alternate chronicles, I initially was like, okay, what would it be like if, you went to an alternate version of your life, but in that alternate version, your other self died. Mm-hmm. And initially, when I first came up with this idea, she just died in like a car crash or something.
Oh, really?
Yes. And there was this fiance who was a doctor. And they interact. And it's the same thing with her relationship with her dad was the same thing. Mm-hmm. Different name, different
And then
premise.
you went, let's make this really dark.
Well, and then I was like...
what if we threw in a serial killer?
Yeah, just because I really enjoy mysteries and stuff. I was like, why don't I marry literally everything I like about any story?
Yeah. What if I put all of my favorite
serial
things
killers,
into one book?
Yeah, all of the things. And that's why there's a lot of intensity in her backstory and all of these things. But that's kind of how it started. It was first this concept of alternate realities, going to this other version of your life in which you had died, but you have this, fiance or whatever. Yeah. And then it morphed into what it became. But it was always in mind. I always keep in mind, regardless of what the other element is, I always think about it side by side with a romance and how that's going to develop. So I'm curious to ask people who, obviously, if you're just a straight romance author, we know that the romance is the biggest part of your planning elements.
Yeah, but for those who write, both sci-fi stories often have a whole romantic element. Dystopian story, if you write anything other than romance,
that contain romance, I'm curious to know how you approach your storytelling. If it's initially just, this is the dystopian story that I'm telling, and then here's a sprinkle of the romance, or if you approach things with both in mind, or if you approach the story, you start writing it and a romance crops up. Like, I'm just curious how all of that works for everybody else, because this is how I approach it. It's always with those two things holding hands as I'm walking forward.
I've got two... Don't hate me. You're not going to hate me. Don't roll your eyes. I've got 2 additional series that eventually, when Abrady is done, and when Miss Bell's first 4-book arc is done, and when, obviously, Unborn's going to be done before both of those, but when those 3, big projects are done, I have 2 additional full series, one with my husband and one with my sister, that I want to work on. And the one with my husband is a space opera, and there, at the moment, is no romance in any of the stuff, because it's my husband's story and he's going full on Halo with it. But I do think side characters will have romance in that one.
Because that's real world, too.
Because that's real world. There are relationships in the real world.
Yeah. So
even if you're not dating.
That's where I feel like that's kind of what I'm driving at with this whole, when you approach stories, is it, I'm including these elements just because that's part of life. No matter what the world is doing, there will be people who...
And that goes back to one of the things we addressed earlier, which is world building itself. There are other people on the planet.
That's part of world building. Yeah. I will always have my main character.
Yes.
In some sort of romantic...
Yeah.
And I don't tend to write multiple POV stories, and I haven't.
That's true.
I don't really have a plan to in the future at all.
I thought, like multiple, more than two. Yeah.
And usually the dual
like,
POV
2 is multiple.
No, usually the dual POV is the two main
guy
characters
and the girl,
who fall in love.
That's fair.
So that's always how I do it if I do dual.
Yeah. Are you still planning on, or well, I don't know if you were planning on, you were potentially going to have this next Unborn book dual. Are you still planning?
Yeah, so I started writing.
Start writing
from his perspective to see how it felt.
Yeah,
and kind of give a little bit of flavor.
This is the pantster talking now. Of the I'm checking it out. Must see how I like it. Must see if I like it. I would be sitting there going like, cool. This chapter's this person. This chapter's this person. This what they're going to do in these chapters.
Nope. That's not how Tracey do.
So the other series. So there's the space opera.
Yeah.
The other one is a middle grade YA series.
Which arguably probably shouldn't have a whole lot of a romance.
And it won't. The main character is this kid, and it follows his story from like 10 or 12 to like 18. So there he's got too much going on. Yeah, kind of. It's a 4-book series, and my sister and I spent a weekend in Santa Cruz, and I was supposed to write a different book, and instead we outlined all 4 books.
That sounds like my nightmare.
It was so much fun.
I love talking out plot and like plans for stories, but I don't. But fully outlining more than even just one book that's plenty for me to handle. We
talked it out. I wrote out a outline. Okay, so 4 is an exaggeration. I wrote out the full outline for books 1 and 2, partial for 3, and a little bit for 4. And then we also have a map of the world. It's very like she was reading Alana the Lioness by Tamora Pierce, and I had just read the V.E. Schwab series, that trilogy. I don't know. It's Darkness, Magic, Shadows, something. But there are 4 different Londons, and there's magic. It's like whole magic building world, and there's rules, and which I love. I love a magical world where there are rules to the magic. You can't just do whatever the heck you want. And so it was a love child of those 2 genres of like, because Alana is arguably more YA than middle grade. For Tamora Pierce's books, most of them are middle grade, but it has that feel of a middle grade adventure story. But so it was that plus this like magic system and like a marketplace where you can get runes, and there's like a dragon in a tent and like cool stuff like that. Anyway, I'm very excited about the series. But the point is, there will be a little bit of romance, but that's sort of something that I, in my planning process, I'm like, okay, what is happening with this character? Where are they going? What are they doing in the story? Oh, well, they're spending a significant amount of time with this character. They're probably going to fall in love. Like, based on these 2 characters' personalities, I feel like that'll be fitting. And then, for Miss Bell's Travel Guides, the first 2 books... the second one does not count as having romance.
No, it doesn't.
No. The first 2 books do not have any romance. And I think when I wrote the first one, I was like, cool, at some point in this series, there will be some romance. There will be some relationships of that nature. But it's kind of heavy topics. And it's heavy situations that the characters are in where it does not make sense for Lacey to have any romance in that first book.
No.
Not at all. And Miss Bell's a little busy. And then in the second book, it's Miss Bell's got some serious PTSD going on. And Damon is on a mission and has a singular goal. But there is a
taste of it.
There's a taste of it. And we've talked about it a little bit, how book 3 is going to have like more than a taste, like a dipping of the toe into essentially just to let readers know, hey, at some point we will have relationships. At some point we will have a romance for you to read. But at the moment, these people are trying to survive.
Yeah.
And it's just
I feel like that's how the stories meld and
part of the
change,
genre too,
and part of character development too, because the Miss Bell's travel guides is over a length of time, and you see how characters change and grow over that time. Miss Bell is a main character in all of these books.
She's got a line in the third book when she sees this guy that she wants to. He's asked her out on a date, and there's the internal monologue of like, cool, I just started therapy, I'm trying out these new antidepressants. It's a great time for a new relationship. I'm just, no, it's not, but
that's also, sometimes that's life
too. Exactly.
Where you're like, I'm still kind of in the midst of struggling and doing these things, and like, what does that look like? And when do I make the decision to put my mental and emotional health first?
Yes.
Versus, all of those things. And I feel like it's perfect when you have that kind of a build in elements of the characterization and stuff over time. And
and it is supposed to be a series that I have the first, not outlined, but I have a dozen books in mind. There's a plethora of characters. At some point, they're going to New Orleans to deal with the music industry. At some point, they're going to deal with the sisters' art gallery in Brooklyn. And they have to go talk to Korskoski. I don't remember his name. In Poland. There's a lot of stuff. And,
but the approach is more about those elements of plot. Whereas for me, I have more alternate chronicle books, stories to tell. I have at least 2 more that I want to write.
So excited for these.
But it's always, here's my main character and here's a little bit of the story. This is the love interest. I don't even have how it's going to happen necessarily in my head, but I'm like, this will be the love interest.
By the time we get to the end of the book, these 2 characters are in love.
Yes. Or on their way. I actually don't make a habit of, like in Love Undercover, they don't say I love you to each other in that book because they're only with each other for a week.
Oh, and you've got another...
And I make a point of that. Just like with the Cassidy book, it's months from the beginning of the first book to the end of the third book. There's
half a year.
Not quite. But like 3 or 4 months.
Oh, okay.
And it's not until the third book that anyone says I love you, because I don't like that element of like, yes, you can have feelings for someone and want to be with somebody and still,
but there's a big difference between that and being fully like, no, we're gonna get married.
And that's something that I've experienced in
so there's 2 kinds of romance. I'm just gonna jump in real quick. There's the 2 kinds, and this is actually, writers, this is important if you are querying. This is actually an important thing for people to know if they're going into traditional houses. There's happily ever after, and there's happy for now. So HEA and HFN. And the publishing company that I was previously with, that was a requirement.
Was it HEA?
Or HFN.
Yeah.
You cannot... romance as a genre...
Yes. If you're writing a romance, it's not considered a romance unless it has one or the other.
Yeah, or both, depending on how many couples you have in your book. True. But it is not a romance book if it ends as a bummer.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think a lot of writers, maybe not a lot, but a number of writers, hopefully you don't take offense to this, because it's not us saying you can't have romance in your book if it's going to end bad.
But
it's not categorized as a romance. No. So if you mark it, and I posted an Instagram reel the other day saying, write what you love, like the rest will come later, because I'm getting into those kinds of things. And somebody commented that they're writing a romance that has, like, the idea of the comment was, it's not going to have a happy ending. And I don't know this person well enough to reach out, but that's not a romance. And if you market the book as a romance,
you will get so much hate.
F up your readers like that, you will not, the book's not going to do well. It's just not, which is, I think, part of why Lacey Goes to Tokyo didn't do as well with its previous cover. Because, and we've said this before on this podcast, it was a very romantic vibe cover.
Mm-hmm.
It was a sultry red dress,
Mm-hmm.
which was gorgeous. Stunning cover. I absolutely love it.
Because
But
even if it wasn't a romance, it still, you would expect more of a romance element to it.
Yeah,
and
or
there was
some kind of spice or some kind of,
Yes, and there was not any of that. And so the change in cover was a really smart move on your part.
Thank you. And also on your part. I mean, I knew I wanted the cover changed, but you made it different. Which I appreciate.
That was a little bit of an accident, but I was also like, here's this other idea that's totally different than what you had.
I was
and then she's
bored.
like, that's the one. And I was like, oh, okay.
I was bored one evening, and then I made 6 cover templates for Cheyenne.
But it is something to keep in mind. Like, you can say that there is romance in your book, that there's a romance subplot, that there's a big element, but you cannot market it as a romance.
And we say you cannot. You can. You shouldn't.
Yeah, that's what...
It's not.
If there's not a
idea.
happy for now or not a happily ever after, you will get so much hate from your readers.
Yeah.
And they will feel like you were not honest with them about what happens.
And
so if there has to be, contemporary women's fiction, or you have a suspense or a mystery or dystopian or fantasy or whatever, like if they don't have a happy for now, or it is a little bit different when you have a series.
I was about to say, because the first Cassidy book is not a happy for now. Mm-mm. It is a mega cliffhanger. Mm-hmm. And so the book itself, not marketed as a romance. Mm-mm. The first Cassidy book is action, suspense, thriller, alternate mystery. Realities. Mm-hmm. The trilogy as a whole, this is a mystery, alternate dimension romance series. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's a different situation, right? That's a different take on it. Yeah. If you end the first book in your duology and you want the duology to be a romance, and the first book ends with
maybe
the breakup or one of them dies, and you're going to bring them back in the second one, that's not a romance. That's not a happily for now or happily ever after. Mm-hmm. And therefore you should market it as something different. And then when the second book is done, you say, this duology is a romance. Mm-hmm. This series has a romantic subplot. Mm-hmm. I'm not marketing anything except my fairy tale retellings as romance at the moment. I mean, Unborn will say there's a romantic element, but it's also not a romance. No. That's not because it doesn't end happily ever after.
I would not say mine is a romance. I do, when I've been describing it, post-apocalyptic sci-fi romance. Yeah. So it's still part of the main, but it's the last one. Thing that because the romance is a big element, and it is a big part of
it's a bigger
their
element
story
in mine than it ever has been in my books.
Yeah. But that's still not the first thing. And mine is a HEA, HFN.
Yeah.
Kind of both.
I think it depends, right? Because if you decide to go back to Vic's story, then it's a HFN. And if you're done, then it's an HEA.
Yeah. Which either way, it will end happily with.
Yes.
I don't kill off my lovers in my stories, so they will never die.
And then there are books that don't have any romance, which we'll talk about plot for those ones another time, because that's a fun thing to talk about. But yeah, just a little heads up for writers.
We're just kind of talking about, the kind of combo of the two, marketing in that element. We could probably even talk about this more, because we did go rabbit trail a little bit on different elements.
Yeah, fully jumped tracks
plotting
several
and pantsing
times.
And some of that stuff. So this was a little bit chaotic, but the main meat of what we're getting at is there is a difference between having a straight romance.
Yeah, and having romance as a subplot and having romance as a sub-subplot.
Or having it as a parallel with another big element of the plot.
Yeah.
And how that changes the feel of the stories. And I would particularly describe myself as a mood reader. And so there are times that I'm in the mood for something lighter, where I don't need all of the action and the excitement. Mm-hmm. But
and there are times this is something that I think is really good for writers and readers, but writers specifically to know, because this is something that I mean, just us talking about it right now has clicked into my brain of your book does not have to be romance or not romance. It doesn't have to have romance as a plot element or not at all, right? Like you just said,
you want.
There's romance, there's the two plots where romance is one main plot and then something else is the other.
There's and they go hand in hand.
And they go hand in hand. There's romance as a subplot where you've got a really, truly stronger, bigger story happening. I mean stronger in terms of like the plot itself.
That's the focus.
That's the focus. And then there's also pretty heavily accented romance of like, this is part of what is driving the story forward. And then you've got which those are the two that you write, right? As a like dual plots or romance as a subplot. And then what I write is romance as a subplot and then subplot, which is where
or not at all,
which is their, well, and that's the last one. But what I write is usually those two of there are, I guess I also write not at all. There are romantic elements, but it's not even a secondary focus to the story.
Yeah.
Which is good to know. It's good for authors to know that, hey, like, you can write your spy thriller without it needing to be romantic at all. You can also write it where there's a small subplot of romance. And all of this ties
back to the importance of knowing those elements of your story so that you can market it effectively and in a way that your readers are going to appreciate because they know what they're getting into. And that also ties into your cover design as well. Just like we were saying with Lacey Goes to Tokyo, the cover gave too much of a romance vibe or a hint that might be part of it, even if it's not a main plot, and it's not in there at all. And so it's really important to make sure you're not falsely advertising your story.
Yeah, that's a really big element. And it's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about what genre you're writing. I think there is no genre that cannot have romance at the least as a subplot. And I think their age range wise, we're talking about something different. We're not talking about middle grade, etc. We're talking like YA and adult books. There is no genre where you're unable to have a romantic subplot. But it's not a requirement by a long shot. It's not something that you have to do. And it still comes down to
write what you want to write. Yeah. Write your ending the way that you want the ending to be. And don't think about, my characters, I have to force this ending because that's what readers want.
Yeah. Write what is true to your characters and your story.
Yeah, you will find your readers. Just like, we should talk about POV at one point.
Absolutely.
First, third,
that'll
present,
have to be
past, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because there's all of that ties into the same thing with reader expectation.
Yeah, I saw a post on Facebook yesterday evening that said I'm writing a third person and I'm worried it won't get picked up by a publisher. Because first person is really hot right now.
Let's save that for another day because I have a whole host of thoughts about that.
I do want to talk about the Love is Murder cover real fast because we were just talking about, especially with romantic stories, the cover. So for those listening, the Love is Murder cover, the I in is a butcher's knife, steak knife. Has Death of a Douchebag at the top. And then we've got a woman with her arms crossed and she looks very like, don't touch me. I will kill you. Not explicitly dangerous vibes, but she's
not happy.
She's crabby. But then the silhouette in the background is a couple kissing in blood red, and there's blood splatter across the cover. And it gives, truly, you're so good at covers, Tracey. It gives the 100% vibe. In the foreground is the serial killer. In the background is blood splatter and a knife. And then right there, front and center, but not drawing overt focus, is a couple kissing. And that gives the information about Carrie that someone would want to know after reading the blurb, which is kind of promiscuous and likes romance. And it also gives the suggestion that there will be romance.
And the cover is black, so it gives you the dark.
Yeah, it gives a dark vibe. And then you've already made the cover for Kiss or Kill, which has more explicitly the romance.
True. That was not even a conscious decision on my
part. In the background, we've got the previously established couple. And then in the foreground, we've got the soon-to-be established couple. And it's sort of, it really does give the reader the proper expectation. And we'll do, I mean, we talked about covers way early
I like
on.
this analytical side of it though too. Like we talked about covers.
We did, yeah. That's what I'm saying. Is we need to do a deep dive.
Yeah, this is a great.
That was the whole point of the overarching was to give a little taste of what we're going to continue to do and give people just a little brief. But yeah, I'm looking at our covers.
Well, we'll have to go into this more.
That'll be another podcast.
But how about you guys? Like we said, if you're an author, tell us about how you approach your plot in this.
Yeah,
like not outlining,
romance.
but just your story ideas, that kind of thing in relation to romance, if you have romance in your stories. And then also if you have more questions, if you want us to go into more depth on anything specifically related to this, drop us a comment. Let us know how you feel about, what we've been talking about.
Yeah, let us know if you're liking what we're doing, if you have changes you would like to see, if you have, again, other things that you would like us to talk about, to deep dive into. We are not experts. We're not experts on everything about writing, obviously, but we are here to help. We want to contribute to this community. That's a huge part of the reason behind the podcast, besides a good excuse for us to sit and talk to each other for an hour, is to assist. Mm-hmm. We want to help readers and writers, indie authors and authors who want to go into traditional publishing.
Even readers. I'm sure that readers would appreciate some of this stuff, because I know people don't really. I've had readers ask me how I approach storytelling and that kind of thing. I know this could be interesting for them. Any questions, comments, anything, just be nice, please, of course.
Yeah.
What if you don't have anything nice to say, shut your trap. I don't want to hear it. I'm serious. If you don't have anything nice
My
or
husband
anything,
will pop into the comments and say, "Yo, mama."
Constructive to offer, then don't say anything, because we don't. Yeah. There's no reason for that. But you can. Ask questions.
That's also a whole other podcast episode topic, is how to treat each other. Anyway, keep scrolling. If you're not a fan, that's fine. You don't have to like everything in the world. You also don't have to tell everybody.
Word.
Anyway, thank you all so much for listening. We keep going over on how much time we plan on talking, but I think our content on the main feed, at least, is pretty relevant to what we want it to be in terms of being useful and informative, and that is our goal. Also to make ourselves laugh. We're not chuffed about it if you're not laughing.
Also, we just like talking about this stuff. So if you get bored,
that's fine.
That's fine. Half of it is we just enjoy.
We've got other episodes.
It's funny because we hang out and talk about this stuff all the time, and yet we could still go on forever talking about these things. So, anyways, comments, questions, and what?
Yes, sorry. Also in the comments, if you are an author, specifically indie authors, but everybody else too, let us know if you'd like to be interviewed.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee that we will pick your name out of the hat. We've already got a list. But we do want to start getting into maybe every other episode. We'll be talking to some people. We've got some romance authors we're going to chit chat with. We've got a
lot of different things, because I do still want to ask Adrienne about Enneagram stuff for characters. Yeah. That kind of thing.
We need to do that epilogue of you sitting there giving me the Enneagrams for different famous people.
Or famous
characters.
Probably.
Harry Potter's a famous person. Anyway, thank you all so much. As per usual, at the end of the episodes, I have to go pick up my kid. So we appreciate you being here.
Tell us we're pretty.
Have a lovely rest of your week.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you so much for tuning in. For more and to check out our after show, The Epilogue, head over to patreon.com/Barski-Lyn Adventures. We'll see you next time.